there were World War II prisoners of war there at Gruber,
Yes, sir.
and they worked on some of these also.
Well, some people say.
It's alleged.
It's really interesting because I'll get some people that are really adamant and say, oh, it was definitely built by the Germans.
Uh-huh.
And then somebody else, a different time, just as adamantly say, no, they were not.
Hi, Brian. The clip you just saw was a PBS TV show I saw in Greenleaf State Park, I want to say 7 years ago. And it was Two-Wheel, Oklahoma with Brad Matheson and I believe it's Rex Brown. They were talking to Steve Evans, the Oklahoma State Park naturalist. And that was all I remembered was that clip, and I really wasn't buying it, so I didn't think too much more of it. And until recently, my wife said, let's take the grandkids for the weekend to Greenleaf, and they got me curious, so I did some... Welcome to Love the Ozarks. We appreciate you stopping by. Today we are at Greenleaf State Park, one of the most family-friendly state parks in the country. We hope to show you 4 things today on this video. Number 1, we'll go over some general stats and information about Greenleaf. Number 2, we're going to show you some of the wonderful facilities and activities that they do have here at Greenleaf and what makes it so family-friendly. And we have brought along our grandchildren and dogs to test this out. Number 3, we're going to go over some of the history of Greenleaf State Park and nearby Camp Gruber. It's impossible to tell the story of one without talking about the other. Camp Gruber actually surrounds Greenleaf. We are in the middle of Camp Gruber right now. And number 4, unexpectedly, we're going to talk about what, if any part, German POWs may have played in the making of this wonderful facility here at Greenleaf State Park. Greenleaf is located in the Cookson Hills of eastern Oklahoma. It's about 3.5 hours from Springfield, Missouri, just a little over 3 hours from Little Rock, Arkansas, 2.5 hours from Oklahoma City, and about an hour from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Well, here if you need anything, Muskogee, Oklahoma is about a 25-minute trip, and Gore, Oklahoma is under 15 minutes away. You can get pizza delivered from a nearby place right here at Greenleaf even. Greenleaf is 920 acres with 14 miles of shoreline. As you can see behind me, the lake. It has an average depth of a little over 16 feet and a maximum depth of a little over 45 feet. No jet skis, wave runners are allowed on Lake Greenleaf. It does have a swim beach, docks, boat launches, Greenleaf Marina and Grill, which you can see over my shoulders, the marina there. It's all located within the park. It has boat slips, fishing boats, kayaks, canoes, paddle boats, and rentals available. The marina also operates a heated fishing dock with inside and outside fishing, open 24 hours a day. Fees for the fishing at the dock, the enclosed dock, are $5 a day, $3 a day for seniors and kids under 12. Greenleaf also has 3 hiking trails for visitors to enjoy. The Family Fun Trail is a 1.5 mile paved beginner level hiking trail. It is wheelchair accessible and begins at Greenleaf State Park office. The trail has markers to identify historical landmarks, benches, a gazebo, an observation deck that overlooks the Arkansas River. Beautiful little trail, easy for anybody to go on. Deer Run Nature Trail is a 1 mile long trail that gives a glimpse of the beautiful area, and it's open to all skill levels of hikers. Greenleaf Hiking Trail is also called Greenleaf Ankle Express Hiking Trail. This trail is approximately 18 miles long, goes deep into wooded areas on the east side of the lake. It consists of one large loop that can be broken down into a north and south loop. It is intended to be taken counterclockwise direction and is considered intermediate to expert level. It does have 2 overnight primitive campgrounds and a swinging suspension bridge on it. The suspension bridge is being rehabbed right now, so that portion of the trail is closed while we're here. Greenleaf has over 100 RV campsites, some with 50 amp or 30 amp electric and full hookups. As well as 100 tent campsites. Facilities include a community building, pavilion, enclosed shelter, outdoor shelter, swimming pool, amphitheater, nature center, playgrounds, volleyball, basketball courts. They even have a horseshoe pit. In addition, it has a well-stocked kids pond that allows children under 16 to fish for free. No permits or licenses required. In addition to all this, there's 16 rustic cabins, 15 rent out of these, and I believe 10 of these have fireplaces of the 15 that they do rent out. The newest was added in 1994. It's called Cabin 15 or Cabin on the Lake. It was designed to meet the challenges of campers with physical disabilities. It's donated by I believe it's the Telephone Pioneers of America, national organization of Southwestern Bell employees. The cost was approximately $90,000, and at that time, one of the 3 handicap accessible cabins on state parks or national, or one of the 3 on park facilities in the country. We did arrive after hours, and they leave the keys in lock boxes in the park office, and the hotel or the telephone number that you reserved your room on is the combination to get your key to your room, and then you just go up in the morning when they open the office and do the paperwork and register. I believe you need to do that before 11, but like I said, we showed up after 5 and it was not a problem. We wanted one closer to the water with the screened-in porches, but they were all taken. So we did reserve one behind that. They do have different rates and rates for different times of the season, so you want to make sure you check with the park for the time and date that you're thinking of. We paid $89 a night for ours on a Friday night. For a Friday and a Saturday night, it was $89 a night. They did allow pets for our 2 dogs. It was an extra $15 each per dog per night. So we thought it was pretty much better than expected with the facilities, the quality of them, and the pricing compared to what you would pay anywhere else for that kind of setup. The cabins all have bathrooms, kitchens with full-size appliances, heat, air, dishes, cooking utensils, pot, coffee pot, linens, towels. They're all provided. You basically just need to bring food and maybe like paper towels or perishable or consumable items like that. In addition to all this, they regularly do different activities, hay rides, they have astronomy programs, campfire programs, party barge tours, and more. I believe they do hay rides, all kinds of activities. While we were there, my 4-year-old granddaughter did an activity at the Nature Center where she made her own fish-shaped kite that she really got a kick out of. Really good place for kids, and even with the rain and all the bad weather we had while we were there, it was still, I didn't get as much footage as I wanted, and I wasn't able to do this until later on. But we did have fun, kept the dogs and kids occupied. Just was a little tough. I might have been a little ambitious thinking I could film and do this all at the same time, but it was definitely, we rated it as a great weekend and encourage others to try it. If you just wanted to know about the park, I think that pretty much concludes it for the park and what a good place it is to come and visit, and the facilities and everything that it has here. Sorry about the light and everything. I came down here, I swear the weather turns terrible every time I come to this place. Anyway, I wanted to get down here and get in out of the wind and stuff and try to finish this video. But like I said, if you wanted to know about the park, I think we've covered that. But I wanted to go into the history, and I do promise you that the title about the POW, what part they played, was not just clickbait. It is a legitimate question, but I want to give you some of the other history. We'll get there to that part. Muskogee County, which is where the park is located, Muskogee, Oklahoma, is the western half of the county is prairie turning into, there's some river bottom, and then in the Cookson Hills, which is the western fringe of the Ozarks. So the park is in the Ozarks, but it's on the very western fringe of it. What makes the county significant geography-wise too is the convergence of three rivers occur in the county. The three rivers are the Arkansas, the Verdigris, and the Neosho are the Grand River. Become known as the Three Forks. And there's also a lot of salt springs in the area, and this led to abundant game. There's a lot of game in the area. Archaeology shows they go back to prehistoric time, finding evidence. Most of the archaeological finds in this area, though, were 300 to 1200 AD. Excuse me. 300 to 1200 AD. During that time period, there's a lot of mounds along the river. The mounds people had a significant presence in this area, definitely. Around 1719, I think it was, a French trader, trapper, came from Canada down into the area, and in present day Muskogee County, he discovered Wichita Indian village there at that time. And by the late 1700s, there was pretty much a French trappers established little settlement at the Three Forks area of the rivers. By the 1800s, the Osage Indians had become the dominant Indians in the area. They were more aggressive and had driven the Wichita out of the area. The Cherokee and the Choctaw, though, had hunting parties that constantly came into the area because of the rich game and salt and other things in the area that attracted the Indian hunting parties. There'd be constant conflicts with the Osage Indians. So I believe it was 1824 the federal government established Fort Gibson along the Grand River, the Three Forks area, to keep the peace among the Indians. Near the fort is where the current day town of Fort Gibson popped up, and I believe it's the oldest town in the county and one of the oldest towns in the state. So the Cherokee and the Creek were both driven to Fort Gibson as the end of the Trail of Tears here in Indian Territory, and what a lot of people don't know is many of the Indians, the Cherokee and the Creek, had brought their slaves with them, and when they got here along the Arkansas River bottom, they established cotton plantations, some of them did, with the slaves that they had brought with them. So by the time the Civil War had came up, the Cherokee and the Creek Indians that were sympathizers of the Confederacy formed Fort Davis at the Three Forks area on the Arkansas side across from Fort Gibson. And at Fort Gibson were the Creek and the Cherokee Home Guard, along with the feds sent the Kansas Colored Guard to help them hold the fort. So I thought that was interesting that during the Civil War we had the Indians against each other, and they brought in the Colored Guard out of Kansas. Just you don't hear much about that at all. After the Civil War, there was negotiations with the 5 tribes. They renegotiated some of the treaties, and the reason they renegotiated the treaties with the 5 civilized tribes, which were the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole, the renegotiation of the treaties allowed the railroads to build through Indian territory, and they were going to establish a train depot at Fort Davis, which had been burned and captured during the war by the Union. But the train wasn't suitable for it, so they decided to move it downriver a little ways, and that train depot is the present day location of Muskogee, Oklahoma, and what put Muskogee basically established it as a settlement. In 1894, the Dawes Commission set up in its headquarters in Muskogee, Oklahoma, to renegotiate the treaties with the 5 civilized tribes again. This time they were doing allotments and stuff, registering the tribes on a registry so they'd know who was who. And one of the other things that happened, a lot of people don't realize, is because some of the Indian tribes had slaves, the freedmen also received allotments of land. And here in Muskogee County, I believe there was 4 or 5 all-black towns that were established by the freedmen with these allotments. I believe it was Lee, Summit, Chase. I can't remember all the towns, but there was quite a few towns, all-black towns, that sprang up because of the Indian allotments. Anyway, I just thought that was very interesting. Didn't want this to really be about a president, but Franklin Delano Roosevelt took office in 1933, and pretty much this park wouldn't have existed without him. And I did find it very interesting, a lot of the things that were happening at that time frame just had a lot of similarities I could see. And I think you might see them also. I don't want to say much more, but I did want to tell you a little bit about FDR and how much this park basically is an encompassment of everything FDR. And I would have never guessed that, and I never realized it. But anyway, in 1933, FDR took office. He was a great speaker. He was able to motivate people behind him through his speeches. At his inaugural speech, he gave the famous "You have nothing to fear but fear itself" speech. He also was famous for the fireside chats. The new media of the day was radio, and he took advantage of it and was using the media to his benefit. In his first 100 days in office, we were in the Great Depression. Things were very bad across the nation. There was a lot of panic, And during his first 100 days in office, he enlisted a whole alphabet soup of all these different government agencies with all these experimental programs to try to stimulate the economy and get things back on track and working again. This went on for 8 years. Nothing got better. I believe it was in 1935 he came out with a second round of stimulus and alphabet soup programs, often referred to as the Second New Deal or second round of the New Deal. Eleanor, his wife, was a big advocate of his, helped him promote a lot of his things. Eleanor was also his fifth cousin. It said once removed, which I don't understand the once removed, but it was his fifth cousin because she was Teddy Roosevelt's niece. She didn't have to change her name when they got married. She was already a Roosevelt, so I thought that was interesting. But anyway, she was one of the biggest proponents of his programs and helped him push them. But despite of all this, the Great Depression continued. A lot of his programs were enacted through executive orders. There was lawsuits. There was Republicans versus Democrats, and things weren't getting better. So he was losing support. There was a lot of talk that he was stacking the Supreme Court, so that when the Republicans took him to court, that it would protect his programs because he'd put liberal justices in place. Anyway, one of his more controversial executive orders was the Resettlement Act of 1935. The idea of the Resettlement Act was he was going to relocate, and he did. He relocated struggling urban families and struggling poor rural families from marginal land and to planned government communities. This took a whole heap of criticism. The program was later changed to the Farm Security Administration because of mismanagement and corruption. But that's how Greenleaf became government land, is much of it was acquired by the Resettlement Administration. A lot of the cabins and the work done here was by the WPA, which is the Workers' Progressive Administration, later changed to the Workers' Projects Administration, I believe, due to the socialistic sound of progressive in the name and the things that were going on. Anyway, they also had the Corps of Engineers, built the dam, did I believe a lot of the engineering for different projects here at the park that were done by the WPA. The Civilian Conservation Corps, another program started by the New Deal. It was mainly young men, 18 to 25. I believe over the years they had like 300,000 that they enlisted in the Civilian Conservation Corps. Here at Greenleaf, they replanted all the forest here, pines, oaks. They planted, I think in their existence, like 4 billion trees over the United States. The problem was most of these young people that they needed for the labor to do these projects, and most of these projects occurred at parks. I believe there was different projects at 800 different parks, and they had over 1,400 different camps. And to move these people to these camps, they didn't have the infrastructure to do so, so they enlisted the Army to move the Civilian Conservation Corps from their locations to these camps. These camps, they would usually enlist some tradespeople or something to teach and show them, and they did do probably a lot of good that is often pointed to by liberals today, and there's no denying that. I think they taught 57,000 illiterate young men how to read. They did employ 80-some thousand Indians and Native Americans in their projects. They did take some craftsmen and other foresters and other trades to help teach these young men how to do these projects, and they did everything, trails, cabins, bridges, all kinds of projects. And the infrastructure to these parks is probably the only big project they've ever had, because the parks are always the first thing cut by Republicans or Democrats. Every time there's a government shutdown, it's the parks that you hear about that close. And they just, I'm sure everyone knows the parks don't, you know, always get the first in line for the money. So this was a big help to all of our parks all over the country. And here at Greenleaf, like I said, they did a lot of these projects. The Civilian Conservation Corps, the young men that they took to these camps, they also did have some blacks, but despite the 14th Amendment, they were segregated into separate camps. They weren't, there was still segregation by the government on their Civilian Conservation Corps camps. They wouldn't have the whites and the blacks in the same camps, which is kind of weird, considering that's the liberal side of things that were doing these programs. But anyway, the other thing was they paid them, I think, on average $30 a month. And of the $30 a month they paid them, they were required to send $22 to $25 home to help support their family, and then they could keep the remaining, and they were taken care of at the camps. Naturally, this was an executive order that created all this. The Republicans were very against it, lots of threats of lawsuits. But all this kind of come to a head in 1939 when war was declared in Europe, and over the next few years, all of FDR's social machine that was trying to end the Depression was suddenly turned, and they put all the effort into the war machine and winning the war, basically. I believe it was in 1942. Well, let me back this up. I believe it was December 1941, Pearl Harbor occurred. It was January 1942 that Manhattan Construction was awarded the contract to do for Camp Gruber. More land was acquired, taken, besides the other land that the Federal Resettlement Administration had occurred in order to meet the needs of the camp. I believe they created 100 frame buildings, and the first general orders were issued in May of 1942. So construction was fast, and they put together a machine to get it done. Things got worse for the American people. They went on rations. The War Board took over control of many items. Everything was rationed. Everybody pitched in. People were drafted. They went to war. So yes, I believe that the Great Depression, the suffering continued and got worse, but I believe the American people sucked it up and did it for their patriot. They were patriots, and they did it for the greater good, and that was why they're known as the greatest generation. Couple items. One I got from Camp Gruber's resources office, natural resources office, I believe it is. One of them is a letter from one of the prisoners of war that was there, and the other one is their official summary or paragraph about the prisoner of war internment camp that was there. And once we establish those facts, then I will pose you the question that I had at the beginning of the video. So let me read this for you for just a minute, and I do apologize. I had to read this. It's been copied a few times, and it is very hard to read. The German prisoner of war POW internment camp was in operation from May 1943 to June 1946. It was one of several internment camps throughout Oklahoma and was the last in the state to close after the end of World War II. The POW camp encompassed approximately 130 acres on the west side of State Highway 10 across from the Sicily Gate. It housed approximately 4,500 prisoners based on the prisoner list in the Fran Barker collection housed at the Oklahoma Historical Society. Many of the prisoners interned were at Camp Gruber. Camp Gruber had associations with the Schultzlaffeln, which was the SS Guard, and they also housed the SD, which was an espionage and counterintelligence department of the SS, and they also had the SA, or stormtroopers, as well as the Hitler Jugend, which is a Hitler Youth or juvenile counterpart of the SA, as well as Rommel's Afrikops that had been captured. Camp Gruber was one of the first internment camps in the United States to utilize the POWs for off-camp labor. Prisoners worked in the cantonment, maintaining sidewalks, roads, ditches, the ground, swimming pools, and vehicles. Some worked in the offices and stores within the cantonment. Others worked off-post on local farms or the local stone quarry and sandpit. The POWs also made improvements to their compounds. They constructed monuments, fountains, gardens, bridges, sidewalks, and other improvements. They were permitted to attend movies, participate in sports, and take correspondence courses, subscribe to American magazines and newspapers, produce concerts, plays, variety shows. The POWs even had their own newsletter, the Camp Gruber Zugden. I cannot pronounce German, I apologize. Which was also written and published by the POWs. It offered the prisoners an open forum of discussion for issues such as the war, philosophy, history, camp events, politics, education, and even current movies. The following photographs in the letter I'm about to read you was donated by Martin Hansiko. Mr. Hansiko was a German prisoner of war who was kept at Camp Gruber from September 1946. Basically, I want to read you the letter that he wrote to the mayor of the city of Braggs. This letter was thanking him, the mayor, for his help. Mr. Hansiko was trying to retrace the steps of his life. This was in 1994. At this time, he was an Australian citizen, and he had corresponded with the mayor. The mayor had sent him some photographs and some newspaper clips, and I thought you might find this letter of interest. It is, Dear Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for your letter of April 27th, 1994. Your immediate initiative and effort to provide me with photos and newspaper clippings is very much appreciated. May I assure you that your informations are of importance and significance to me. I was astonished to see still existing relics made by POWs 50 years ago. Many times I passed the front gate, also built by POWs prior to my arrival in September of 1944, going to and from work in the clothing store of the 42nd Infantry Division, the Rainbow Division. Unrestricted, we mingled with Army personnel and civilians. Therefore, we had the opportunity to practice our elementary English. To preserve the remaining relics at the former POW camp is commendable and notable, and I wish to thank the persons responsible for that. With pleasure, I enclose photos made at Camp Gruber 1945 before D-Day. You certainly will recognize the monument, which represents the decisive battle of Napoleon's defeat by many armies of different nations in Europe in the year of 1813. Our barracks had a windmill as a monument. Just to say, as POWs, we were treated well and in accordance with the International Convention. I was contacted by an editor of the Muskogee Phoenix newspaper Mr. John Morrison. It is Mr. Morrison's intention to write an article about D-Day, June 1944. Thank you again for everything. I am grateful. Kind regards to you, Mr. Mayor, and to your wife, the mayoress. Kind regards to you, Mike Pierce, and kind regards to the other folks at Bragg City Hall. God bless all. Martin Hansico. So around 1949, the federal government started redistributing some of the assets that it had acquired for the war and the forming of Camp Gruber. And there were continually agreements ever since then, renegotiating between the National Guard, the park, and to be honest with you, ownership is a very complicated thing, and I don't understand that, but the nearest I can tell is, from what I understand, just give you an idea, is the dam on the lake. All these cabins are owned by the Army Corps of Engineers, but they're operated by the Oklahoma Park Service. The lodge, which originally was part of these camps or cabins, the lodge is operated and owned by the National Guard, and that's still in operation today. That's why we haven't been up there to show you that. But what I do know is Mr. Hansico passed through, he said in his letter, the stone front gates constructed by POWs. They did go all over and do all the necessary labor that was needed because of all of our young men were gone to war, and they utilized that, and they did expose the prisoners of war to American ideas and American culture, I think trying to spread democracy and do the greater good. But the question remains on these 5 cabins that are a little bit different than the others. Did prisoners of war help build these? Did they quarry the stone for them? What part did, if any, prisoners of war do in constructing the cabins, or 5 of the cabins anyway, at Greenleaf State Park? If you know anything about that or can contribute anything, please leave an answer in the comments or whatever you may have to contribute below. I'd love to know more about it. I think it's fascinating that all these federal agencies and state agencies, I don't think any of them really know what some of the others did, or the former ones that don't exist anymore did, and they obviously don't know everything the prisoners of war may have done. And I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say about that. I'm Brian from Love the Ozarks. Hope to see you on the next episode, and I do apologize for this one running so long. I promise a quick one. Thank you.